I'm Lenore Taylor, editor of Guardian Australia. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Voluntary and Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would like to welcome all of you, our friends, collaborators, supporters, readers, listeners, welcome. I think we all know that this is an incredibly important and consequential time in the media, in the world, and therefore a really important and consequential time for the media to fulfil our responsibilities and our mission. And for that reason, I am particularly pleased to introduce to you Katharine Viner, the Editor-in-Chief of The Guardian. Katharine was the launch editor of Guardian Australia some 11 and a bit years ago, and she will be in conversation this evening with Michael Williams, who I'm sure most of you also know from publishing, broadcasting and many things, but at the moment the editor of The Monthly. So without further ado, welcome, and I will hand over to Katharine and Michael.
Thank you, Lenore, and it is lovely to be here for tonight's event. I feel very much like the fox in the hen house. I watch The Guardian from outside. I admire and revere The Guardian. And so to be here tonight to put Kath Viner's feet to the fire. I was promised a fireside chat. I haven't seen the fire yet, so we have to be internally generating that fire. We are on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. This land was never ceded. An acknowledgement of country, for me, is about acknowledging that the moral and legal implications of invasion remain unresolved. And now, Lenore put it much more elegantly than I will, but the world's gone to shit. I think we can all agree. Things outside these lovely doors are not going terribly well. And it does mean, the number of friends and loved ones I have who say, look, for self-care, I've decided I'm opting out of media. I don't want to consume media anymore. It leaves me kind of hollowed out and miserable. And I hear that and I think, none of us in this room have a choice to opt out from media. We have, one way or another, made it what we do, made it what we're committed to. And we have this sense that the more the world burns outside, the more our responsibility to the work that we do, the more acutely we understand that. Kath is one of the most impressive people I've ever been lucky enough to meet. And the thing that struck me from the very first time I got to meet Kath was here was someone who had a more acute ear for reading a community, a society, a culture, a politics than anyone I'd met. We sat down and in theory the meeting was Kath kind of picking brains on who should get involved in Guardian Australia. Anyone I mentioned, she already had established an understanding of and a view. She was like, that person, I think they're really impressive. I want this person as part of the team. If Kath was putting together a heist, she had worked out everyone from the getaway driver to the acrobat. So she had them all worked out. And it was incredibly impressive. And I thought about that and I thought about what it is to understand not just media, but understand what is required from you in a new context. Before we start, I'd ask you all to give one more round of applause for Kath Viner. Kath, I want to start broad. I would like to get to the kind of particular both achievements and challenges of your role at The Guardian. But before that, I want to speak to the moment because clearly we are at a time when independent, ethical, thoughtful journalism is more important than ever. How do you approach that at a broad, personal, philosophical level?
I mean, I think it's all about stepping up to the moment. So I've been editor-in-chief of The Guardian since 2015, and obviously 2016 was the vote for Brexit in Britain and the first Trump election. So it's felt like it's been high stakes right from the beginning of my editorship. And I think what we try to do is say we are going to face it head on. We're going to call it out for what it is. We're still journalists, we're not activists, so we're going to be based in facts and we're going to be thoughtful with what we write, but we're not going to shy away from it. I see quite a lot of journalism at the moment. I mean, there's a certain bit of the media worldwide which is obviously ecstatic with what's going on, is thrilled that they think they'll have smaller taxes and get rid of anyone you can class as DEI. But I think the thing that sort of worries me more is those kind of media organizations that are really hedging it. They're sort of not really, don't worry too much. Trump's not that scary, really. Don't take him so seriously. It's quite sort of, we're cooler than that. And I just think that's a huge mistake. We've got to take everything he says seriously. Obviously, he overwhelms us. There was a story at the weekend that says he's awake for 21 hours a day and doing executive order after executive order. He can't do all of that, and there will be some checks and balances in the American system and so on, or in the global system. But he can do a lot of it, and we have to take it seriously. It's tough. It's tough on us as citizens, I think, as citizens and as readers. So our job as editors and journalists is to try to help you prioritize what's going on, perhaps not to be too overwhelmed by it, unless you want to be, and then we give you that as well. But I think it's about helping people prioritize and never sort of underestimating or underplaying what's going on. Because it's global. It's not, of course, it's not just Trump and his effect on America, it's Trump and his effect on the entire world, both practically, whether that's Ukraine or Taiwan, and then sort of emotionally, you feel like what he's doing is contagious, and people are already feeling empowered to behave in certain ways they never would have done in six weeks ago.
You make the distinction between our role as journalists from not being an activist role, but it seems to me that part of this context means that demanding truth becomes activism in a kind of absurd Alice in Wonderland kind of way, that asserting that you're going to fact check a person, asserting that you're not going to print that black is white just because that's the edict of the day, is an inherently activist role.
I think it's activist. It might seem radical in the context as someone is saying 2 + 2 = 5, and we insist. We say he said 2 + 2 = 5, but we will always tell you that it equals 4. So it may seem radical in that context, but really it's just commitment to the truth. And I do think for fact-based news organisations like The Guardian, to go too far into activism can really alienate your audience and make them not trust you. We need them to trust what we write. We just need we need to call it out, and I think that. But maybe you're right. Maybe in the current climate, that is quite radical.
I mean, the news that AP are going to be banned from presidential briefings from here on in suggests that the media company that has a set of principles and an idea that they want to follow is a media company that's painfully old-fashioned. Kath, I mean, what an embarrassing throwback that is to believe that you can just report truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many. That's one threat. What's happened to AP? They've been banned from press briefings because they said they wouldn't change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. But there's a whole litany of things that could happen to news organisations. I mean, Kish Patel, who's the new FBI director, said he's going to go after journalists very specifically, and there are many ways they can do that. They can do that through legal pressures, and we've seen what's already happened with big media organisations settling with the Trump administration in ways they really wouldn't need to, you'd have thought. But and we know that other news organisations, such as the Washington Post, their owner has been bending the knee to Trump in a very literal way. To the great detriment of their journalism. So, just standing up for what is truthful and calling it out is a place to hold readers, to hold them still and sort of say, we will always be there. We've got no other reason to be here than to tell you what's happening. We're not going to make someone rich. The Guardian doesn't have shareholders. It doesn't have a billionaire owner. It doesn't have anyone telling us what to report. So our only aim, our only mission is to keep reporting in the public interest. And that's quite powerful. It's interesting, about the ownership model. It's one of those things, it's sometimes been hard to communicate to people why it's so liberating. I think the model we've got, which is we're owned by a trust and any profits we would make would be reinvested in journalism, that is the perfect, it's a sort of dream ownership model for journalists. And it's been quite hard. It sounds quite sort of theoretical, but what happened with Jeff Bezos? The Washington Post team wrote an endorsement of Kamala Harris before the election, and then a week before the election, or so, a few days before the election, he pulled it. They lost 300,000 subscribers as a result. But I think that's shown to people why you don't want a big billionaire, powerful owner who is going to try and use the news organisation as his plaything and his way to curry favour just to get tax breaks, really. I mean, it's pretty bleak.
Oh yeah, incredibly grim. But what does that mean for your relationship with both your journalists and your readers in terms of that sense of ownership? Because I think any good masthead, any good media company is trying to build a relationship where the people in its community feel invested in its fortunes. They feel like they have a say, and that can be a wonderful thing, and it can also be, from time to time, a headache.
Well, I mean, our business model, for those who don't know, is that we have voluntary contributions. So you can read the website for free. We would like you to give us some money for that, but you don't have to. And then we've got lots of products that you pay for, whether that's the app or the newspaper in the UK or Guardian Weekly. And that, I think, builds in a particular relationship with your audience. It immediately says, this is not a transaction. It's not you give us money, we give you journalism. It's that we're going to give you journalism that's going to inspire you to support us because you think it matters. And when we launched this model in 2016, it was absolutely ridiculed in Britain. Who would pay for something you can get for free? And it immediately was a big success with readers. And so we asked them, what is it about this model? Why are you paying for something you could get for free? And we were really surprised and delighted by how many of them came back and said, I can afford it, and I'm going to give you money so that you can keep it free so that people who can't afford it can also read it. And I think that public message, I would never say that we would never do a paywall. We don't know what the next few years are going to sort of what they're going to be like for the business model for journalism. But I think there is something that is so valuable beyond financial value in being good journalism based in facts, transparently funded, that anyone can read on their phone. So many good news organisations now are behind very hard paywalls, so you have to have money to read them. And I think there's something really empowering about our model that everyone can read it. In a moment like this, in such a polarised moment, you sort of think the more people who can read what we're doing, I think the better.
It's a pretty big gamble a year into your leadership of the company, though, like to make that pivot to say this is something we're going to try. That's a little bit terrifying. Did it come out of crisis, or did it come out of a kind of proactive desire to realign priorities internally?
Yeah, I mean, when I started, we were in a very bad financial situation. I think we were about to lose £100 million that year, and we had 600 million in the bank. And although most journalists are arts graduates, we could still do the maths. And so I also studied maths till like 18, as I always tell people. So
see, now I'm only going to ask you maths questions for the rest of the session.
Divide by dx. Yeah. But so it was. We were in trouble, and in fact, when I wanted to try something before we tried a paywall. I wanted to try something that leveraged the Guardian's deep relationship with our readers. And interestingly, our first messaging with this voluntary contributions model was, we're in deep trouble. We're going to have to close. Can you imagine a world without the Guardian? Wouldn't that be terrible? Give us your money, as Bob Geldof would say. And they really did. But what was interesting is that when it worked so much better than anyone predicted, after about a year or so, our messaging changed to, this model is really working. Why don't you come and join this successful funding model? And that messaging was much more successful than the devastating. I think, this is my sort of message for how I feel about editing The Guardian, is that if you can give people hope, if you can show them something that's working, that is an antidote to Trump as well. If you can say, look at these people who are resisting it, look at these people who have got different ideas to how to get out of this mess. And look at our different funding model. It's a hopeful funding model. And our readers really support that. We're having an absolute record time for reader revenue as well, by the way.
That's a good thing. Do you think that's a recognition of the value of what you do, a sign of the relative scarcity of that kind of approach to journalism?
I think a lot of it is. I think a lot of it is. I mean, the media is only made up of citizens like everything else, and I think lots of people are really scared. But I think we're lucky as journalists in that we've got a role to play. We can try and lean into this and sort of communicate with our readers what's going on, find out things that people don't want to be found out. So I think that gives us a role to play. But the interesting thing about this surge in reader revenue to The Guardian, it started the day of that Bezos killing the Kamala Harris endorsement. We wrote to our readers and said, well, we're happy to endorse Kamala Harris, and we've not got a billionaire owner telling us what to do. We had this huge surge, and it's been maintained through the election, and it's still maintaining now. And there was also an interesting thing about reader behaviour. As you probably know, we're a global news organisation. We're founded in Britain, but 72% of our audience is outside of the UK. What we always used to say is that British and Australian audiences behave quite similarly in that readers would say, here, have a recurring contribution, you do your thing, we love The Guardian. Whereas American audiences would say, I'm giving you this money for that article, and I want you to do more like that article, quite a different role. Since the election, the Americans are now behaving like the Brits and the Australians, and they're saying, here, have money every month. We love The Guardian. We think The Guardian is important. And that feels a really big shift.
It's probably because they've gone back to having a king. They're much more comfortable now. That's the only way to do it. What are the things you learned after setting up Guardian in Australia and then going and doing a stint at Guardian US? What are the things you learned in both those different publishing territories that have been integral to you understanding the broader Guardian picture?
Yeah, so I think our big challenge is how to be a global news organisation that feels relevant wherever you are. We don't want to be like The Economist. The Economist is great for its audience and so on, but that sense you get from The Economist that it could have come from anywhere, that isn't right for The Guardian. So the way we think about it is that you have Guardian values and the Guardian approach to journalism, and then you do it with an Australian accent or a British accent and an American accent. So it should all still feel like The Guardian wherever you read it, but it will feel a bit different. It'll feel appropriate to the place we're in. And there's sort of different markets as well, different audiences, different types of audiences, but still, I think, sharing fundamental values about how we see the world.
Given that idea about a kind of overarching Guardian set of values, does it mean that you feel you're held particularly to account when individual things you publish are seen to fall short of those values? Because
all the time.
Yeah, like I guess that's my question about ownership and about readers with a sense of ownership, is almost the more successful as a media company you are at doing your job, the more you're going to be shouted at every day for doing your job wrong or badly or not the way someone else perceives it should be done. How do you navigate that? Because obviously you aspire to a multiplicity of voices, but how do you keep your true north and work out what should and shouldn't be in the Guardian pages?
Yeah, I think, again, that's another big challenge for us. And I think there's a lot of noise around particular subjects. And, one of the things we try to do is kind of clear that out the way, get off social media and think, right, what do we think about this? We've got a fantastic network of international correspondents, so I always think, what are they telling us on the ground is a crucial thing. Most of the people who are attacking us probably aren't on the ground of that particular story. They probably don't really know what's happening. So I really believe in the power of reporting on people, not just on power. So finding out what's happening in communities. I think, by the way, just on your other question as well, I think that's part of our success globally, is that we're really in those communities. We're not just top down. I think lots of news organisations have failed when they've tried to be global because they perhaps look at things through an American lens. We don't do that. We try and say it should feel like an international progressive lens, but not a British lens, and not an American lens.
I do think, and this is thinking back to kind of 2013 when you were setting up the Australian arm of things, one of the things you were always very attuned to and sensitive to was the relationship between the hard news part of what you're doing and the cultural stuff and the social stuff, and how important it was to have a kind of porousness between those two spaces to be able to genuinely reflect the place where your news was coming from. And that, I think, remains the case in The Guardian?
It feels more important than then, because and Trump knows this. Trump understands the power of culture. That's why in his third week he made himself chair of the Kennedy Center. People said, oh, why would he do that? He does it because he knows how important culture is to politics. He knows that it's the same story, and I think that intersection of those two things is really crucial. Yeah.
I hope he makes himself head of Creative Australia. They need someone new, and someone with a clarity of purpose, I think, would be nice, rather than someone who just changes with the wind. But that's a separate question, which I'm going to ask you to comment on. No. I'm not at all. So, given all of that, I mean, there are we've kind of touched on the various threats to running a media company and to good journalism, and some of them are political and some of them are about a cultural moment and some of them are about the business model. What about things like OpenAI and the relationship between that and your journalists and the work that they're doing?
Yeah, so this is a huge subject that we find ourselves talking about every single day. And I think what's a big interesting point about it is that it seems to be shifting all the time, and we don't know where it's going. Anyone who tells you they know where AI is going is lying, because they don't. So I think there's two different parts to it. The first bit, I think, is the sort of tools you use for journalism. So there's some tools that we've been experimenting with, which are unbelievably exciting for journalism. You can put in a 500-page dense report, and that would take you 3 weeks to read, and in 20 minutes it's summarized it into 10 points. Now, you wouldn't want to publish that summary. I think you always want to have someone qualified, a journalist, to go through it, but the amount of time it saves, the data sets they can go through, that is the exciting part. I think the challenges are around what it could do about, say, to a news organization's relationship with our audience. If it totally disintermediates readers from, say, theguardian.com or from our app, or it makes a newsletter pointless because there's already an AI newsletter, and makes a podcast there's AI podcasts that are really much better than you'd expect. So, how can we differentiate ourselves, make us more about distinctive Guardian reporting, perhaps distinctive individuals doing Guardian reporting, to separate ourselves from that? So it's about using the bits that are good about it and trying to guard ourselves against the stuff that is worrying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about the pressures of Meta, of media companies more generally, of Google, of all of these kind of market forces that have a hold on government in different ways that make it much harder for media businesses to do what they're doing?
Well, I think in the digital world, you have to work with media companies, otherwise no one's going to see your journalism. And that is the kind of challenge of the moment. There's only a handful of them. They were nearly all at the inauguration. So how do you work with them so that as many people as possible can find your journalism and not influence it? So yeah, big challenges.
Just before I let you go, I do want to come back to that question of what it is to ethically run a media company at this point in time. And I guess beyond the idea of truth and prosecuting truth and giving a voice to that where it might not otherwise be heard, what are the things for you that make what must be at times a harrowing job feel worthwhile?
It's one of the most worthwhile jobs anyone can do, journalism, I think, especially if you're doing it in the public interest. And our funding model allows that to happen. There are no other forces on me. The Scott Trust that owns The Guardian says that the editor is guaranteed to be free from commercial interference and political interference. That is an amazing setup. And so we need to use that privilege of that setup really wisely, and to really, hold the powerful accountable, and that might be in surprising ways over the next few years, to try and give our audiences a clear understanding what's going on. So I call this clarity and imagination. So give them the facts they need to understand the world, the ideas they need to try and find a way out of this, and those two things together, in the words of Rebecca Solnit, drive hope. So that we've got to try and say, we've got to have faith that good journalism and good information and knowledge will get us out of this. It can't last forever.
Please join me in thanking Katharine Viner.